In this module, we will look at updates to the ESXi hosts, and we will look at the VMware vSphere Update Manager, which is used to download updates from VMware. We will then install the Update Manager and use the Update Manager to scan ESXi hosts and to apply updates to those hosts and to automate the entire process so it happens automatically every day at midnight, so we don't have to do it ourselves. Many of you are already familiar with updates in Windows. This is the Windows configuration screen that configures the Windows operating system to grab updates from the Microsoft Update website every day at 3 in the morning. This grabs updates for the Windows operating system, such as Windows 7 or Windows 8 or Windows Server. But what we are going to look at is updates for vSphere, updates to the ESXi host. Several types of updates. Updates include patches, which are used to fix an error in the operating system, or security patches, which are used to fix errors specific to security. Updates can include improvements, new drivers, and new features. You can apply the updates manually, one ESX host at a time. You can apply the updates to the first host, and then to the second host, and then to the third host. And if you only have 2 or 3 hosts, no big deal. However, if you are in a large environment with a large number of ESXi hosts, it's just too time-consuming and labor-intensive to individually configure and update each ESXi host. So we automate the process. That's the purpose of the vSphere Update Manager. The vSphere Update Manager is a centralized automated application that's used to download updates from VMware and apply those updates to the ESXi hosts. Let's look at the Update Manager components. The Update Manager is installed on a Windows server, on a virtual machine, on an ESXi host, and it downloads the updates from VMware's website, and then it pushes those updates down to the ESXi hosts. But before we install the vSphere Update Manager, let's review what we mean by maintenance mode and migrating virtual machines. During the update process, the host goes into maintenance mode, and what that means is that the virtual machines running on that host are unavailable during the update period. So the question is, what can you do to make those virtual machines available when the host is being updated? And the answer is the virtual machines can be migrated to another ESXi host so they will still be available for the users. Maintenance mode settings eliminate downtime for virtual machines when patching ESXi hosts. 4 steps. Number 1, the Update Manager puts the host in maintenance mode. Then 2, the vSphere Distributed Resource Scheduler moves the virtual machines to another host. It moves the virtual machines to another host so those virtual machines will still be available to users when this ESXi host is getting updated. Then the Update Manager applies the patches to the ESXi host, and this little picture of a Band-Aid is supposed to be the patches which are being applied to the ESXi host. And after the ESXi host has been updated, then the virtual machines are migrated back to that ESXi host, and then we can apply the process to the next ESXi host. So when do you migrate virtual machines from one ESXi host to the other? And you do that when the virtual machine must be constantly available. Now, if you can live with a virtual machine being unavailable for the 10 minutes that it takes to apply the updates to the host, then don't bother configuring for migration. But if that virtual machine must be constantly available, then we configure it to be migrated to another ESXi host, so it'll still be available to the users when the first ESXi host is getting updated. Now let's install the Update Manager. The Update Manager is an application, and it's installed on a Windows 64 4-bit version of a Windows Server on a virtual machine which is located on an ESXi host. And it's installed from the vCenter installer DVD, which we downloaded from VMware. So if we go to the vSphere client, here is a virtual machine which is called the Update Server, and under the console we can see that the Windows Server operating system is running in that virtual machine. If I maximize the screen, I can see this is a Windows Server with an IP address ending in .33. So this will be our Update Server. So we put the Update Server installation DVD in, and we run the install program. And I know you've seen the vCenter installer before. We use this to install the vSphere client. We will now use it to install the Update Manager. VMware vSphere Update Manager enables centralized, automated patch and version management. So we will click on Install. We will click on Next, specify the language by clicking OK. And then we click on the checkbox that says Download Updates from Default Sources immediately after installation. What that means is, assuming we have a high-speed internet connection for this server, and we do, as soon as we install the vSphere Update Manager, it's going to connect to the VMware update servers and download all the most recent updates, which we can then apply to our ESXi hosts. We click on Next. Then it says, please provide the necessary information about vCenter server below. Now what we're installing here is the Update Manager. But what we have to type in is the IP address of the vCenter server and the username for the vCenter server and the password for the vCenter server. And the reason for this is so we can integrate the Update Manager with vCenter server so it can be centrally controlled by vCenter. Click on Next. Then we specify the IP address that the downloads will be downloaded to, and that's the IP address of the server, which is going to be the Update Server. Click on Next. The files will be installed to the C drive. Click on Next, and then the files are copied and installed. And now it says Update Manager successfully installed. So now we've installed the Update Manager on a Windows server in a virtual machine. Now what we need to do is to add the Update Manager extension to the vSphere client. So we go to the vSphere client, and under Plugins we select Manage Plugins, and we will see that under Available Plugins we see the VMware vSphere Update Manager. So we right click and select Download and Install. Welcome to the Install Shield wizard for the VMware vSphere Update Manager client. We click on Next. We click on Next. We select the licensing agreement and click on Next. Then the files are copied. And now we have successfully installed the vSphere Update Manager client. The reason we've done that is so we can manage the Update Manager from the vSphere client. Now if we move over to the far right here, if we scroll over to the far right, we see that a new tab has been added by this installation, and this shows the update manager. Now right now there's nothing here because we may have installed the software, but we haven't configured the update manager. So now let's move on to configuring the update manager. To configure the update manager, we go to the vSphere client, we select Home, and we go to the bottom and select Update Manager. Then we select the tab that says Configuration, and there are 7 items on the left that we should check. Now it says this is the IP address where the updates will be downloaded to. That's the IP address of the update server, and that's okay. And then it says this is the port number of the Simple Object Access Protocol, which is used to communicate with the update server. And what they're saying is, if you have any firewalls between you and the vSphere ESXi hosts, then you might want to make sure that port number 8084 is open on those firewalls. If I go down, if I select Download Settings, we can see that the downloads will come from VMware.com. And I could click on Download Now, but instead I'll go over to Download Schedule. And if I click on Edit Download Schedule, we can configure it such that these updates are downloaded every day at midnight. The notification check schedule shows that the vSphere Update Manager checks with the VMware Update website every hour for critical updates. Under Virtual Machine Settings, we can configure it such that a snapshot will be taken of each virtual machine before the updates are applied. That way, in case the updates screw things up, we can always roll those virtual machines back. That is why we take snapshots. However, if we do not take a snapshot, remember snapshots take a little while to perform. If we don't take the snapshot, it tends to speed up the process of remediation. And then under Host Cluster Settings, we have Maintenance Mode Settings. And this controls what we want the virtual machines to do when the host is in maintenance mode. Now, if we select Power Off the virtual machines, then the virtual machines will not be migrated to another ESXi host. However, if we select Do Not Change the virtual machine power state, that means it's going to keep running, and it will therefore be migrated from one ESXi host to the other. If we don't mind that the virtual machine is unavailable for the 10 minutes that it takes to apply the updates, then we would select Power Off the virtual machines. However, if we want these virtual machines to be available to the users even during the update process, that is when we select Do Not Change VM Power State. And what that means is the virtual machine will be migrated. If we click on Cluster Settings, we can see certain features might need to be temporarily disabled for cluster updates to succeed. For example, we might want to disable distributed power management. The reason we would disable distributed power management is so distributed power management won't shut down an ESXi host during the middle of an update to save power. We typically would want to temporarily disable. Now, if we look up here, we can see these features will be automatically re-enabled after remediation is over. So we typically would select this checkbox. And we would also temporarily disable high availability emission control. And the reason we would do this is so virtual machines are not prevented from starting due to insufficient RAM. But to understand this, let's just back up to Module 11 and do a brief review of the emission control policy. And the purpose of the emission control policy is to allow virtual machines to start up only if there are sufficient resources for failover. Here's the example we looked at. If you have 3 ESXi hosts and 2 of the hosts are operating at capacity, then the third host must be free to provide failover capacity. And if it is not free, then the virtual machines will not start on the other ESXi hosts. Why not? Because there will not be failover capacity. That's the purpose of the admission control policy. Well, here's the problem. If one host is in maintenance mode, then it will not be available for failover, and therefore the virtual machines will not start on the other hosts. So what we're supposed to do is to disable the admission control policy during the update period. The reason we do this is so virtual machines will not be prevented from starting due to insufficient resources for failover. And why would there be insufficient resources? Because we have taken this ESXi host offline for purposes of maintenance. So typically we would click off on the checkbox to disable high availability admission control so virtual machines are not prevented from starting due to insufficient RAM. Fault tolerance. Typically we do disable fault tolerance. And the reason we do that is because fault tolerance cannot run on ESXi hosts with different updates. So, during the update process, the fault-tolerant virtual machines are disabled. Then both ESXi hosts are updated, and then after the ESXi hosts are updated, then the fault-tolerant virtual machines are started up again. Typically, we would not select enable parallel remediation. Typically, we want sequential remediation. In other words, first one ESXi host goes into maintenance mode and gets updated, and then it comes back online. And then the second one goes into maintenance mode and gets remediated, and then it comes back online. And that way, not all of our ESXi hosts will be offline at the same time. One at a time will be updated. The last variable, seventh variable, is VApp settings. Now, as you know, if you modify a virtual machine or a VApp, it frequently has to be rebooted. And what Smart Boot says that not only will it reboot the virtual machine or reboot the VApp, but it will also reboot any dependencies, any virtual machines which are dependent upon the VApps which we have to reboot. We typically do enable Smart Boot after remediation. Those are the 7 variables we typically configure on the update server. So what remediation means is to apply updates, what VMware calls baselines. Now, you may have heard of one definition of baseline, and that definition is average utilization over a period of time. That is not what VMware means when they say baseline. When VMware says baseline, a baseline for them is a set of patches and updates. A baseline in VMware is a set of patches and updates which are applied to the ESXi host. So if we click on the tab that says baselines and groups, we will see that these are the 2 default baselines which were downloaded when we installed the Update Manager. And you can see there are already 238 patches in that baseline. If I right-click and select Edit Baseline, you can see there are patches within that baseline. Patches for the ESXi host, patches for VMware tools. So now let's apply the baseline. Let's determine which hosts are not up to date and then remediate those hosts as necessary. So we go to Host and Clusters View and we scroll to the far right to the tab that says Update Manager. And then under Attached Baseline Groups, there are none. we right-click and we select Attach. And then we will click on the checkbox for the critical host and non-critical host patches. These are the default baselines which were downloaded when we installed the Update Manager. I click on Attach. Now you can see that there are 3 ESXi hosts in this cluster, and we don't know whether or not they have been updated. So to determine whether or not they need to be updated, we click on Scan. We click on Scan, and it scans the hosts for patches and extensions and for upgrades. We click on Scan, and it takes a second or two to scan the ESXi hosts. And then what it shows us is that all 3 of these ESXi hosts are non-compliant, meaning they need to have the updates applied to them. So to apply the update, we click on the button that says Remediate. Remediate means apply the updates. We click on Remediate, and we select the host or hosts that we want to remediate, followed by Next. We can add or remove any patches if we want to this baseline. I will not. Click on Next. We can give the task a description such as remediate host, and we can configure it to run at midnight. But let's configure it to run immediately just to see what it looks like. I will click on Next, and now we specify the maintenance mode options. The maintenance mode options control what happens to the virtual machine when the host is in maintenance mode. If we leave the power state to be suspend virtual machines, then the virtual machines will not be migrated. However, if we change the power state to do not change the virtual machine power state, that means keep the virtual machine running, and that means it will be migrated. You would select that if you want that machine to be available to the users even during the migration even during the upgrade process. Click on Next. Then typically we do disable distributed power management such that the hosts are not shut down during the update period to save power. And typically we do disable fault tolerance such that fault-tolerant virtual machines are not run on hosts with different software. Remember, look at the top here. This stuff is automatically re-enabled after the remediation process is over. And then the third variable, we would typically disable high availability admission control so virtual machines will not be prevented from starting due to limited resources. We click on Generate Report, and this shows us if there are any errors. There are no errors. It says we might want to enable enhanced vSphere compatibility, but we don't need to do that because we have identical microprocessors on these ESXi hosts. We click on Next, and these are the patches that are going to be applied. We click on Finish, and then it proceeds to apply the patches. If we look at the bottom of the screen right here, we can see the process of the patches being applied to the ESXi host. It's currently at 21%. Now it's at 33%, and this can take longer depending upon how much is in the update. Now it is at 93%. And now you can see that remediation is complete, and now it shows that this one host is compliant, and it now shows that 33%, or 1/3 of the 4 hosts, one of the 3 hosts is currently compliant, and the patches have been applied. And we could do that to the other hosts as well, or we could schedule it to happen at midnight. Remediation means applying the updates to the hosts. You can do it manually, or you can schedule it to kick off in the middle of the night. A baseline. is a group of patches, and we use the default baseline, but we can create a custom baseline to satisfy any unique needs that our organization may have. So to create a custom baseline, we go to the vCenter client under the home screen, and we click on Update Manager. And under the Update Manager, we click on Baselines and Groups, and these are the default baselines which have been added. To create our new custom baseline, we right-click in the baseline box and select New Baseline. I will call this baseline Baseline 1, and this baseline will contain patches for ESXi hosts. Click on Next. How do I make the decision as to fixed or dynamic? If I click on the Help button, it will show me that fixed baselines do not change over time, but dynamic patched baselines contain a set of patches that are automatically updated by VMware. So we will select Dynamic Updates. Click on Next. Then we specify which patches we want to select. In this case, we will select patches only from VMware and patches only designed to fix errors in the code. We click on Next, and this allows us to exclude certain patches, which we will not do. Click on Next. We can add additional patches if we want. I will not. Click on Next. And now these are all the bug fix patches in this baseline. I click on Finish, and this is the new baseline that we just created with 108 patches in that baseline. So now that we've created the baseline, let's attach it, let's scan the hosts, and then apply the updates as necessary. If we go to the Update Manager tab and we put the cursor in the box that says Attached Baselines, we right-click on Attached Baseline and select Attach, and we select the baseline that we just created, the one called Baseline 1, and we click on Attach. Then we can see that the ESXi hosts are in an unknown state. We don't know whether or not they need to be updated. So we click on the menu item that says Scan, and the scan scans the host for patches and extensions and for updates, and we click on Scan, and you can see it shows 52%. It's in the process of scanning, and scanning is complete, and now we can see that one of those ESXi hosts is compliant and two of the other ESXi hosts are not compliant. To bring a host into compliance, to apply the patches, we click on the button that says Remediate. We select Remediate, we select the host that we want to remediate, and the process here is identical, except we are now selecting Baseline 1 instead of the default baseline. I click on Next. This allows me to add or remove any additional patches, which I will not do. Click on Next. I can give it a task description, such as remediate for bug fixes, and I can have this kick off at midnight tonight, or let's do it right now to see what it looks like. I will click on Next. This allows me to configure what happens in maintenance mode. If I leave the power state at suspended virtual machines, at suspended virtual machines, the virtual machines will not be migrated. If I select Do Not Change the power state, then they will be migrated. In this case, I will leave it at Do Not Migrate, followed by Next. Then I typically disable distributed power management, I typically disable fault tolerance, and I typically disable high availability mission control, as we discussed earlier. If I click on Generate Report, it doesn't show any error messages. It just a suggestion. It says you might want to enable enhanced vSphere compatibility, but that's not necessarily necessary because we have identical processors in these hosts. To apply the patches, I click on Next, it shows the patches. I click on Finish, and then it goes through the process of applying patches, which can take a little while. We can see it's 21% done. And there we go, it's now complete, and we can see that that has brought the second ESXi host into compliance, and now 2 of our 3 ESXi hosts are compliant, and of course we can repeat the process on the third ESXi host, or we can just automate the process and have all 3 of them brought into compliance at midnight tonight. If I click on the Tasks and Events view, it says that the patches were successfully applied to the entity, that the ESXi hosts were successfully remediated. So in remediation, you attach the baseline, you scan the ESXi hosts, and then you apply the updates to the hosts as necessary. If you go to pubs.vmware.com, you will see there's a good explanation of the update manager and how it works, and there's a good section that describes this business on maintenance mode settings and how, if you select do not change VM power state, what that does is it causes the virtual machine to be migrated to another ESXi host for continued availability. In summary, we looked at updates, not updates to Windows, but updates to vSphere and the ESXi host. And we saw that the VMware vSphere Update Manager is an application which is installed on a Windows server, which is installed on a virtual machine, which is on an ESXi host. And that the Update Manager downloads the updates from VMware. We then installed and configured the Update Manager, and we saw that you could enable or disable power management, migration, and fault tolerance. Then we used the Update Manager to select a baseline, to scan the ESXi hosts to see whether or not they needed to be updated, and then to apply the updates to the ESXi hosts. We did it manually, and we saw that we could configure this entire operation to operate manually during operate automatically during off hours. And this concludes Module 13, Updates and Patch Management. Thank you very much.